now we're going to work at getting it into R. So here I have our data written out in an Excel sheet here. And so I'll show you two different ways to get your data into R. It can be helpful if you already have your data written out, as I do here. And if you do that, what you can do is just go File, Save As, and make sure and save your data as a CSV file. And I'm just going to put mine on the desktop here, and I'm just going to call it example data. And I'm going to make sure that it is a, in this case, CSV file. Just use that format. But it doesn't matter. Any of the .csv should work. And of course this, I'm doing this on a Mac, but this would look pretty similar on a PC. You're doing something really similar. So you're just saving it in a place you can access it. You get a warning about the CSV format. That's fine. Just leave it as is. You can ignore that warning. So now let's go to RStudio. And if you haven't opened up RStudio, now is the time to do that for sure. The first time you open it up, it might have you go through some prompts to make sure it opens up like you're seeing here. The only difference is that I'm showing it with some of your lab data in the upper left-hand column. Yours probably won't look like this right when you first open it up. And you won't look exactly like this because this is a bunch of recent data sets that I've worked with, and you don't have that same group. So what you should see is you should see the console, and often the console will open with some default R text, but then you'll end up with a little caret here, and that caret is where you're going to type your data. So for example, if I type B and I use this arrow, B is 0.01. Then when I type B, it will just call it out. And now B forever will stand for 0.01, which is kind of an odd thing to do, but it's just a little calculator. You can also type simple expressions, 3 plus 4 equals 7, for example. So, but we can get more complicated, and there's a lot more we can do with R. There are two ways to get your data into R. Because we're working with a really simple experiment, the simplest way to get data into R is to give the data a name. So we could call it example data. Let's call it example. Let's call it example 1, just because I want to do that. And what we're going to do is store some data in the word or in the phrase example 1. And the way we do that is we use the store indicate. The way we indicate that we want to store something is we type the name we want it to be, then we type kind of a reverse arrow, which is this caret and a little dash, and then we can say what we want to have stored in that word. The first example up at the top, I stored in quotations 0.001 for B, but we could store whatever we want in that word, so that when we type that word, R will call up whatever it is, a data set or a word or whatever it is. In this case, we're going to use the concatenate function, C, and open parentheses, and then just with commas separated, I can enter all of the data that we used to calculate variance in the previous examples. So that was 3, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6, 6, 6, 7, 8, and 10. Okay, so now example 1 is going to be all of those. So if I type example 1, and you note that there's some auto prompts for that, that name as I was typing, and you can always just select those. Regardless, when I hit enter, I get that string of numbers. So now I've stored a data set in the word, or the in the phrase example 1. So now I can do simple things with it. If I just type summary for example 1, look what I get. I get a minimum, first quantile, median, third quantile, and a maximum. So that's kind of nice. I can just summarize that data set. So I can get the mean relatively quickly from this example. It's a little bit more complicated to get the other summary statistics from this, but we'll go ahead and calculate that next. So this is just getting your data into R. Let me show you another way to get it into R before we quit here. That is, you can go up and use the Import Dataset button, which is in the upper right. Import Dataset, I can go to Text here, and in Text, I can go to Desktop, and there's my example data. That's what I stored earlier. So I'm going to open that up. When I open it up, it'll give me this input, which lets me tell it whether the first entry is a header or not. If I press no, it's going to take X and think it's part of my data set, when in fact X was indicating any XI within that group of 11 inputs. So I want to say yes, the heading is contained in the data set, and import it. And when I do that, you'll see here in the upper left, it imports my data, and it's ready to work with. And it's now called that example data. So if I type example data here, I get that same string of numbers. If I do summary, and you see the auto prompt came up there, then again I get minimum, there's my mean, there's my maximum, and the in-between values, just as I did before. So very easy to summarize. Descriptive analysis with these data. We might have to use a package. So R works by, there's a base R code and a set of functions, and then there are a number of packages that you can load. Over in the right-hand corner, you'll see a place where there's a tab that says packages, and there's an install option. One of the packages that I'll ask you to install is going to be called Desk Tools, and you'll see that it starts popping up in the drop-down there, and you can go ahead and install that when you're ready. I've already installed this, but I'll just install it again, just so you can see what it looks like. Yeah, sure, update it. And it'll restart my R session here. It looks like, while it goes through and does some installation. Okay. Once you've installed, you're not done. In order to get a tool to work or a package to work, you have to call it up by using the library option. You'll see the automatic pop-ups that come up here for desk tools. So if I do library desk tools, then it will be loaded, so it's ready to use. So it's not enough to just install it. You need to make sure it's loaded. My example data is still up, and so that still works. I had to call library to get desk tools to work, and so we went ahead and did that. After I've done that, though, if I want to run a description of this data, then what I can do is type DESC for describe. That's Desk Tools Options, and it gives you a little hint here about how Desk Tools works, and so it kind of explains to you how to get your data in there and what you need to tell it. I'll walk you through how to do it for this data. So open parentheses, and if I say what I'd like to describe is the example, the example data, and data equals example data, then when I hit enter, it just gives me a big list of descriptive statistics for it. And so it goes through, it tells me all about what's happening. in the data, it gives me a range, a standard deviation, an index of skewness, a mean, a confidence interval, um, the number of observations there, and all sorts of other statistics that should look like things that you've calculated in other forms. So hopefully that's helpful for you. It also gives me a graphic output describing the data that I've just been looking at. So that's R. A little bit, it seems a little bit more complicated than Jump for some of these simple things, mainly just because it tries to do a lot very fast once you get nugget that is helpful. If you were just after we started this whole adventure on just getting after variance, and of course R did all sorts of summarizing for us, but then where was that variance? We got standard deviation, and we know that that's related to variance, so that shouldn't be too hard. But if we just want variance, VAR, example data, there we go.